May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Once again, good evening, everyone, and Merry Christmas to you. We are so very glad to welcome you to this worship service at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in downtown Atlanta. And again, I want to thank with awe those people who are here in cars in the parking lot right next door to these windows who are watching in real time on a widescreen TV. It's just amazing. All the people who have worked so hard to make this night a wondrous and beautiful night, from flowers to everything. Thank you very much. I've had a transformative Advent. It's been a very unique build up to Christmas, probably heightened and intensified, yes, by this pandemic we're going through. But let me just kind of bookend this sermon by talking about two recent Advent experiences. The first took place last Sunday. My wife and I joined about 100 cars who came into our park driveway. We have a park here at St. Luke's. And there was an amazing live Christmas pageant being acted out by some of the families in our Children, Youth, and Families ministry. Thanks to Liz Beal Kidd and Ethan Scott and others like Susanna Roberts for a brilliant idea, which was very, very, very well executed. This Christmas pageant, which really changed me, was organized into 5 tableaus. The first was a very, very pregnant teenage girl, a member of this parish. She turned and showed us her profile, very clearly indicating that she really could deliver at any second. She was sitting on the back of another teen on her all fours, dressed as a donkey, and standing adjacent with an impressive shepherd's crook was a Joseph, much older than the teenage Mary. It was the Reverend Elizabeth Shaw's Caffey, looking for all the world like Jesus' father. After big smiles and air hugs, we drove next to see a heavenly host of angels who looked like some familiar mother and father angels and 2 children angels I've seen around this place. I imagined that the father angel standing in that angelic family was actually Gabriel, who had just 9 months earlier told the now very pregnant Mary in the tableau next door that she was going to bear a child whose name would be Emmanuel, which means God with us. What a great name, God with us. And after this angel family sang Gloria in Excelsis to Hope in Me, we continued driving the pageant in our car. And here we came upon the third of 5 scenes in the pageant. It was a field of children and teenagers in sheep's clothing, with a very kind mother shepherd tending her flock. Interestingly enough, she did have on sunglasses, probably to help her deal with the brilliance that was about to come from the angels. Nevertheless, the significance of the shepherd part of the Christmas story is often missed. And it's one of my favorite parts of the Christmas story. As a class of persons, the shepherds in Jewish Palestine were officially known as sinners and outcasts, not because they smoked, drank, played cards, and danced, which was the definition of sinners in my boyhood religion, but because shepherds were too poor to pay the temple tax and thereby could not make sacrifices in the temple in order to be rendered religiously correct. So, for them, as a class, to be the first persons to be told of Jesus' birth was quite a warning message sounded to all of us self-proclaimed pious people, that those in the human family who are poor and who are considered outcasts and sinners often get the good news communicated to them before we do. The next live scene was the whole reason for the season. Underneath a beautiful and huge star were 2 more teenagers we recognized as now the current Joseph and Mary, who now Mary was no longer pregnant. Rather, this teenage Mary was holding in her arms a real, live, adorable baby. And they were in fine St. Luke's tradition, an interracial family, and they were clearly in a barnyard. You could tell that because there were two adults posing as barnyard cows in bovine costumes, accompanied by some other domesticated animals smilingly lounging beside the Holy Family. Finally, we came upon some very richly and snazzily dressed magi, clearly making their way, by the help of a star, to next door in the barnyard. And there were three magi with a prancing, fine-looking camel, created by a camel costume, draping two additional teenagers. It was an amazing experience to be out in the middle of the Christmas pageant, befitting the first Christmas, in which we celebrate tonight what truly, in my way of thinking, is life-changing in this world. Let me explain. The life-changing and life-giving event of Christmas that gives you and me so much joy and so much power to heal the world is the fact that the Christ, which is the energy of God, which also is known as love, and which actually loved everything in creation into creation and left its print on everything in creation, this love energy, that Christ energy, which is big love, actually became human. Despite, and this is so important, despite every obstacle known to humanity, a confusing pregnancy, which in most circumstances would be known as an unwanted pregnancy, a lot of chaos in a family, a birth that took place when the parents were immigrants experiencing homelessness also, the announcement of the holy birth to the most poverty-ridden and outcast category of humanity of the time, shepherds, a birth delivered by mother and father with no healthcare professionals around and in a no room in the inn stable, unfit for human habitation, using a manger for a crib, and then a visit from some outsiders, astrologers from a faraway country who, though of another religious or spiritual background, were compelled and attracted to form the first interspiritual experience recorded in the Christian Testament. We are currently encountering horrendous challenges to the human family. However, the Christmas message, in great part, is that nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is impossible with God, my friends. Even in the face of chaos and confusion, immigration, homelessness, the social and cultural stigmas against immigrants and those experiencing homelessness, even in the face of poverty and the stigma of sinfulness or depravity, inadequate health care, and there being no room for empathy or compassion in the world, and finally, any distortion of thinking that says that there are inferior ways to God. That, my friends, is what Christ energy or big love energy can pull off despite all the odds, including the odd with which I will close this sermon later. There is a big however. However, what I've just described is part of Christmas. There is another step to get to what I believe is the real power of Christmas. Now, the purpose of having given you that detailed report about the drive-through Christmas pageant, is not only to describe one of the marvelous events of Advent 2020, but to emphasize with all my passion that I have come to believe that the marvelous Christmas pageant being acted out all over the world tonight is not supposed to be just an exterior, external, exoskeletal event that happened in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. It is also supposed to be an interior event that is alive inside each person in the world right this minute. The ultimate issue is not what happened in Bethlehem then, as important as that was. The ultimate issue is whether you and I are aware that that series of events is happening inside of us and is available to the world from inside of us right now. Whether we experience tonight's Christmas pageant as only external instead of both and external and internal, that will determine whether we experience it as external and internal. That will determine whether you and I have reduced God's life to us to the level of a formality, forbidding God's energy to move me and to transform me and to use me as an instrument with a truly vital influence on my life. It is that interior Christmas event. I want to say that interior Christmas pageant that is summarized by my favorite line of all the Christmas hymns: "Be born in us today." One of my favorite contemporary theologians, Elia Delio, wrote in her Christmas letter these words: "The amazing wonder of Christmas is that Christ is born in you. Be born in us today is the issue." We must do our part to help release a Christmas miracle in this fractured, diseased, and violent world. You and I, in other words, must become walking Christmas pageants. And we will become walking Christmas pageants if we will simply access and live out of that inner sanctuary in our daily lives. Whether you and I are in 2020 and in the future going to be aware of the Christ within, and whether you and I are cultivating and accessing that Christmas pageant inside us, is whether or not you and I will be used by the Christ child within us to help the world to heal and to hope in 2021. So now, turn to the person next to you. Or if you're alone, please put your hand on your heart right now and say to yourself or to that person you're with, you are a walking Christmas pageant. You are a walking Christmas miracle. Now, in the here and now. By that I mean that there is this inner sanctuary within you where everything that happened to Jesus and everything that empowered Jesus to be gentle and persistent, an advocate for justice and peace and inclusion, that empowered Jesus to be hopeful and visionary and audacious, all of that is happening within you right now. From your being pregnant with divine love or Christ power in the midst of the 2020 chaos and confusion, to angels within you taking the good news to those who are poor, outcast, stigmatized, oppressed, and on and on. This is the second and very important part of the Christmas story. In other words, Christmas is not only about Jesus of Nazareth, his parents, an angel Gabriel, shepherds abiding in the fields, keeping watch over the flock by night, and later a group of curious, adventurous magi. This glorious theological teaching about God becoming enfleshed, called the Incarnation, is not a truth that applies to one person named Jesus alone, with Jesus being an exception to humanity. Rather, Jesus is not an exception. Jesus is an example of what humanity's true self and what humanity's true self is, and what we can do to heal the world. Jesus said, "Greater things than I have done will you do if you will unleash the Christ power, the love power, the justice power, the peace power that is within you that was in me." The Incarnation is about both Jesus and that pageant 2,000 years ago, and it is about what is happening inside the deepest part of you and me and all of creation right now. My friend, the deepest truth of humanity is not that we are sinful. It is not that we are depraved. It is not that we are against God. The deepest truth of humanity is that the light of the sacred is deep in all things. We will all be well to the extent that we are one with this light that is in one another and in the earth. I cannot tell you what a relief it is when you believe that the divine light is in every person. What a relief it is to be freed from the judgmentalism that this person is evil and therefore another person is not evil. Or that that person is a racist and that moment is racist and therefore another person and another moment are free of racism. That is why, to my way of thinking, it is important to understand that we all swim in water that is both systemically racist and systemically oppressive, and that evil and oppression and racism and the divine light live simultaneously in all of us. That is why that very wise saying from Alexander Solzhenitsyn is both dictated by the Christmas message of the Incarnation. He said, "The line separating good and evil passes not through certain states, nor between classes, nor between political parties, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line separating good and evil shifts. It is inside of us. It oscillates with the years and with seasons. And it even oscillates within hearts that are overwhelmed by evil. Nevertheless," Solzhenitsyn said, "one small bridgehead of good is always retained." If liberals could get that straight about conservatives, and conservatives get that straight about liberals, and if every identity group could get that straight, that there are no such things as evil groups or good groups without some bridgehead of good inside everyone. One small bridgehead of good is alive and retained in every heart, and that appears to be overwhelmed by evil at this particular time. There is evil, there is no doubt about it. But in my language and in my way of thinking and in the language of the sermon and the church's teaching about Christmas and the Incarnation, the divine light, the Christ, the true self, the energy of big love, the Christmas pageant never dies in anyone, no matter how heavily disguised the baby Jesus, the Christ child, is in that person. My friends, this is the Christmas incarnation way that God deals with evil. Every chapter of evil is an occasion for new beginnings. And we are in the middle of that right now. That is what the cross and resurrection were about. Not to pay the price to satisfy an angry, wrathful God who does not exist. Rather, to bring resurrection out of the tomb and a glorious phoenix rising from any ash heap of evil there is. We can, each of us, be part of new beginnings. We can look with expectation for the sacred deep within the other individual, the other religion, the other gender, the other race, the other nation, the other sexual orientation. And we can look with reverence to serve this sacredness in the other, to honor it, to nurture it, and to come in true relationship with it, allowing it to further reawaken in us the sacredness at the heart of our own being as well. So now I close with the second of many Advent highlights that I would love to share tonight. But I'll never, ever forget that drive-through Christmas pageant and its call to me to be a walking Christmas pageant. And I will also never forget the soloist last Friday in our Advent music series. Her name is Teresa Moore Mitchell. And one of her solos was Sweet Little Jesus Boy. And I feel the lump in my throat coming up right now from my chest. At the moment she sang, Sweet little Jesus boy, the world treats you mean, Lord, treats me mean too. But that's how things are down here. We don't know who you are. When she sang, treats me mean too, she brought her right hand up to her chest. I'll never forget it. I broke into tears. I had never so deeply witnessed the solidarity between the Christ child who was treated mean and the mean treatment of contemporary human beings. My wife and I later called Teresa Moore Mitchell at her home in North Carolina to thank her, to tell her about my tears, and to note that something deep within me had been moved. I asked her if there was a moment in her own life that she was thinking of in that moment when she said, treats me mean too. And she immediately responded. She said, of course, I'll never forget getting a scholarship to study voice in Greece when I was younger. She said I was the only African American in the class. And everywhere I went, to shops, to restaurants, everywhere I went, I was treated with suspicion. My classmates noticed, and some would not accompany me to public places because they didn't want to be embarrassed. But Ed, in every one of those moments, God brought something new and redemptive into being. My friends, our weary world needs a new beginning. We need a new way of dealing with this pandemic. We need a new way to deal with our income mobility problems. We need a new beginning to deal with the discriminatory way in which we treat the shepherds of our time, the poor, the outcast, the marginalized, the traumatized, the victims of racism, patriarchy, heteronormativity in our world. I know a new shift is afoot. I believe it with all my heart. And I do believe that it can be advanced if we will just wake up to the second part of the Christmas pageant, that it is inside of us and that we have work to do to shed the light of God onto the world. Thank God vaccinations are on their way. And we are told that we are in for some of the bleakest months of the entire pandemic before vaccinations become universal. We've already seen an uptick in violence, and Atlanta is considered to be one of 3 hot spots in America right now until we get through the Senate runoff. We have a responsibility to do our part of the Christmas miracle, and that is to understand that the Christ child is inside of us and wants to use us as light and power to heal. When we do that, you and I can be used to begin again, as James Baldwin hoped for, in the midst of all the viruses that are plaguing us. In just a few minutes, we will sing Silent Night. The church will be beautifully darkened. It will be one of the holiest moments of this liturgy. When we sing Silent Night, Holy Night, please place your hand on your chest, as did Teresa Moore Mitchell, and think to yourself, I have the divine light, nothing less than the divine light alive within me. The Christ child wants to use me to help the whole human family and the entire planetary family begin again with the power and the beauty of a rising phoenix. Amen.